We're now in what I think is probably the most important of the 330 rooms in the Deaven Bunker, and it is the Operational Control Center, where all of the principal information about what was going on around the world is fed in front of all of the experts covering various areas of expertise, and in some instances the Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers as well, who probably would sit in the comfortable chairs up at the top of the room. But as you can see, there are senior civil defense officers, nuclear defense operations, communications, and many other of the expert team who come together when important decisions need to be made for the continuation of government. Well, I'm sitting in a chair that might have been occupied, for example, by the Minister of National Defense, sitting beside the Prime Minister, looking at a screen that depicts the whole of the terrible situation that was facing the country at that time, and deciding what might and what had to be done to cope with all of these crises. And you can see there's some fancy telephones sitting on the table here, old vintage telephone, dial telephone, so that gives you an idea of the era about which we're talking, would be the late 50s and perhaps the early 60s. There's a red telephone whose purpose might have been for the Prime Minister to get in touch with the President of the United States, because there's some very important decisions during the Cold War that had to be made jointly by the two. The people who were working in this Deaven Bunker facility, it was a pretty mixed bag, but almost entirely from the government and the military, civilian and military personnel, who were responsible for basically what might be called continuation of government, making sure the government continues to operate in the context of a post-nuclear attack, or even in preparation for a threatening nuclear attack against Canada and the Western world by the Soviet Union in those days. So the people who worked here were all the way from the Prime Minister, cabinet ministers, very senior military officers, government officials, ministers had their own personal staffs and their own little operating areas within the Deaven Bunker, looking after their particular interests in a time of terrible crisis for the nation. We're looking now at a plastic model of the whole of the Deaven Bunker complex. And as you can see from this model, there were 4 levels. It was a huge facility, basically dug into the ground, and it took something like 32,000 cubic yards of concrete to build, 5,000 tons of steel to put it all together. It took several years to build. It was an enormous engineering undertaking. But it does include all of the facilities that were needed to keep the Canadian government operating in time of a nuclear attack during the worst days of the Cold War. The Deaven Bunker was the central government underground facility for survival of the nation when it was under nuclear attack. But there were a number of other of these deep bunkers across Canada. In fact, a good many of them, several dozen. None of them as big as this one. The only one that would match its complexity and its size would be the Norad, the Northern Norad facility based at North Bay, which in fact was not the same type of a facility. It was an military operational center for control of air defense against incoming bombers and eventually missile attack as well too. And it was a huge underground facility, but this was the largest one of its kind across Canada. This Deaven Bunker was designed to look after some 500 key individuals during a crisis. There was, believe it or not, enough fresh food kept in the facility to keep all of them eating well for the first 7 days, for the first week. Beyond that, they had to go on to rations for another 3 weeks. But they could keep the whole 500 plus people alive and well for as long as 1 month without any of them ever stepping outside of the facility.